Yeah, welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. The legendino Tim Vickery is going to love this one because this is his optimum era. Even though he was only 5 years old at the time, the match that we're going to talk about today on the podcast is one of those that is going to have him salivating in so many different ways. Well, you can tell your own story on that, Tim.
Yeah, can we all get in a little time travel shuttle and go back to Mexico 1970 and just stop the world there? Why not?
We could, except I was in Tottenham at the time, a long way away from Mexico, and I don't want to go back to those dark old days of going to school on Black Boy Lane. It still makes me laugh today.
While you were in Black Boy Lane,
yeah.
I've got this vivid memory from this time. Of a mate just down the road. He was a bit older, and he was collecting the football stickers from the World Cup.
Panini ones. Oh, it's before Panini.
It was pre-Panini.
Exactly.
So you got this little biography of him as well, and I remember this so vividly. I saw this photo of one of the Peruvians. I think it was Ramon Mifflin, and it's wow, just a kit, with the sash and the Andean features and even the colours in the backdrop. From a family who'd never been abroad, and it was many, many years till I ever made it abroad. It was like, you know what? There is another world out there. There's a whole wide world out there. It's a big moment for me, this. And this is by way of introduction to the game that we're talking about. Is the quarterfinal of the 1970 World Cup between Brazil and Peru, a game which is hugely important. Not only it's hugely important for football reasons, but also for commercial reasons, and that's part of the story that we'll be trying to tell.
Indeed, that is the exact story we'll be trying to tell, because I think that dominates the conversation tonight. But you forgot to mention, for a 5-year-old from Hemel Hempstead, the idea that there was another world where footballers wore kits where there was a sash going diagonally across the front would forever impact on your love of Subbuteo, would it not?
It would, yeah. Yes.
You see?
Yes.
I know these things about you. We've been doing this podcast long enough. Okay, you mentioned the marketing, and it's a really important point when we say just after the Women's World Cup, the issue of marketing has become very much at the forefront of the women's game, because, of course, marketeers are hovering about seeing how they can exploit this in all sorts of ways, indeed. But the reason why I think that this game is particularly important, you were talking about those cards, the World Cup football cards, but by now they had been usurped by another marketing tool, which I was right at the right place.
You're going to talk about those World Cup coins as well.
Of course I am. Of course I am. Yeah, Esso gadgets. Well, you've I can see our guest is nodding away in recognition. Amar Singh, who is, as well as being a football journalist, something of a sports marketeer, is with us as well. Amar, great to have you with us on this podcast.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure to be here, and I love this podcast. One of my favorite podcasts. So I'm really happy to be joining you. But I fully agree with you, Tim, in that there was something really special about that Peru kit, and that sash that went across it. And just looking back at the videos, I wasn't born at the time, and even speaking to my dad, who shares his memories of the 1970 World Cup, which was really special to him as a young man. It was a special time, wasn't it?
So you chose this game for us.
Yeah.
What is it about this game that is giving us the wonderful pleasure of going back to June 1970?
Well, as you rightly say, it's a hugely eventful game, a really entertaining game, and a very influential game in terms of football and playing football in a positive way. And it's so fun to watch with some amazing goals. But the most significant moment of the game for me happens before kickoff. And that is Pele tying his laces.
Okay, we will talk about why that's a significant moment pre the match. As you both said, it was a brilliant match. You both probably will not remember, as a veteran like me will be able to explain, that in 1970 we thought we were going to win the cup because we won in 1966. So if you can imagine, in 1966, I was a 6-year-old, and all I was chanting throughout my junior school, infant school days is, "We won the cup, we won the cup, E-I-N-E-O, we won the cup." And I just thought that was the tune that the whole world was singing. So in 1970, I thought they were also singing, and this will be the second half of our conversation for this podcast, as it always is. We look at an iconic game from some time in the footballing firmament, and we do look at the context that game sat in, politically, socially, culturally, and particularly musically. So I thought the whole world was singing "Back Home." We generally thought that World Cups were made for England to be able to raise its flag. No other teams existed, not even if they had Pele. But this match tells us it wasn't just the Brazilians that the world should have been watching out for in terms of football, but the lowly Andean-featured Peruvians with a sash around their front kit.
Well, they'd knocked out Argentina. So they were
Amazing.
A force
It's
to be
amazing.
reckoned with. And they could really play, really play. And in the first games in their group, the TV coverage just went mental over them. There were people comparing them to the great Hungarian side of 53, just because of the beauty of their football. They came up against the West Germans in their group, and then you could see that they couldn't defend against the cross, and the goalkeeper wasn't very good, and Gerd Müller shot them down. So they're second in their group. Brazil, because Brazil have beaten England, Brazil are first in their group, so they get to stay in Guadalajara, and we get this very South American match between two very South American sides. And from a footballing point of view, when Brazil have won the World Cup in 58 with a revolutionary new formation, 4-2-4, and the brains of that side is the central midfielder, Gigi, who was just a magnificent player, and he made that midfield work. In 1970, he is the coach of Peru. And it is amazing that he was never offered the Brazil job. I wonder if it's got something to do with the fact that he's black. But I'll just leave that one lying there. And his team are a copy of Brazil from 58. It's a 4-2-4. And as Brazil found out subsequently, 4-2-4 can leave you very open in central midfield. And it's a very open game. And Peru are very open. And Brazil are able to walk through them because Brazil have moved on. Brazil's coach, he comes in late. We'll talk about the coaching change later, because I think it has a lot to do with the story that Amar wants to tell. Brazil's coach, Mario Zagallo, was a player in 58 and 62. And he was a winger, the left winger, not the glamorous one. The glamorous one on the right wing is Garrincha. Zagallo just sees the space. We've only got two in central midfield. So as a player, he's the one who's going to work back and make an extra man in midfield. He sees that 4-2-4 leaves the side very open. I had the pleasure of going in depth with him about what he did in 70, because he made lots of changes to the team that he inherited, the team that qualified, and he's happy to see the team as a prototype of 4-2-3-1. When they lose the ball, it's only the centre forward, Tostão, who was improvised. He's the only one who stays ahead of the line of the ball. Everyone else comes back. So Brazil are more compact. And this wins them the game. Brazil race into an early lead, race into a 2-0 lead, but Peru have their moments. They come back into the game, 2-1. Brazil's goalkeeper, Felix, he really isn't very good. He let in a few in at his near post. Brazil are 3-1 up. And then Gigi goes to his bench and the game changes. He brings on a little forward called Sotil, who was a terrific player. He went to Barcelona later on. And suddenly Peru work. Suddenly, Cubillas, who's the star man who shot down Scotland 8 years later, looks so much like the young Muhammad Ali, Cubillas. Suddenly, he's got someone to combine with, and Peru are really pinging the ball about, and they bring it back to 3-2. And here, You often miss this on the highlights because the highlights will tend to miss this bit out. Here is the moment where Brazil win the game because they're tactically ahead. Sotiri's really flying, and he picks up the ball, and he's going to run at Brazil. And who is it who works back and nicks the ball off him? It's Pele, making the extra man in midfield because Brazil aren't playing with so many players ahead of the line of ball. Pele comes back, wins the ball. Rivellino with a little pass. Jairzinho's away, scores. Game over. Game to Brazil. So Brazil win the game against a kind of copy of themselves from 58 playing 4-2-4 because tactically Brazil have moved it further forward. And Pele is a huge part of that story because he's not only waiting up the field with his hands on his hips saying, give me the ball. He's also coming back and part of the midfield block. So that's why the game, I think, is so important in footballing terms. But that's only part of the story, isn't it?
Woo, woo, woo. That's the sound of Tim Vickery salivating. Woo. Amar, take it away.
Well, absolutely. It is part of the story. I mean, the big story, looking back at this moment in terms of the history of sports marketing and the modern sports industry, was the end of the Pele Pact. Now, the Pele Pact was an informal agreement made by representatives of Puma and Adidas. And those were two companies that were founded by brothers who were embroiled in a bitter feud, a really bitter feud. And now, at this point, by 1970, their sons are running the respective companies, and they both had this informal agreement. They had spent the previous few years competing to sign up the biggest athletes in the world to wear their footwear. So this is a time where the leading people behind sports brands, and it's these essential bootmakers, are identifying the fact that athletes are now becoming the real cultural powerhouse in sport. It's not so much about the teams, it's about the individuals, it's about the superstars and this first generation of real global superstars emerging in football. And if you take the top 10 most famous footballers at the time, Pele would probably be 1 to 5. He was that much ahead of everyone else. He was that much more celebrated. So they had this pact, which was, brokered between intermediaries because they wouldn't talk to each other directly. And it was, if one of us tries to sign up Pele, it's going to trigger a bidding war. It's going to take us into the stratosphere. It's going to harm our businesses. Okay. So everyone else is fair game, but do not go near Pele. Do not try and do a boot endorsement deal with Pele. If you think about it, in 1966, the picture was completely different. There was all kinds of shenanigans going on in England. Everyone was trying to sign up everyone. And actually, the history of these two brothers and their companies is very interesting. We can talk more about that if you like in a bit. But so Pele in 1970, he befriended a German journalist by the name of Hans Henningsen. So he was a European journalist. He covered a lot of Brazilian teams for European newspapers. He was the Tim Vickery of his day, if you like.
Do you know he was in a way, because when I arrived here, I was told about him, and he used to appear on Brazilian TV a lot. And people said people really liked it, having this foreigner on Brazilian TV. And I thought then, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. And that's what I've done, Well
done.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that, but hey. Yeah.
So it connects nicely to us, yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, carry on, Don.
No, I was just saying, so take it on.
Yeah. So, but the exception being that Hans also had a little side hustle, which is he was an emissary for Puma as well. I don't know if you've got any side hustles going, Tim, with any boot companies.
None whatsoever.
Not if the taxman's listening.
I haven't even been approached by MI6 or something. I always think.
Yeah,
but maybe I can't keep my mouth shut. I'd be a terrible
James
spy.
Bond used to say that, and I know this because I was in Diamonds Are Forever. James Bond used to say, night and day, look, I haven't even been approached by MI6. I don't like to talk about that period in my life, though. Diamonds Are Forever period. But I was there.
So this was the good old days where journalists used to spend a lot of time with the teams. They were, embedded in the camps. So Puma latched onto Hans and said, look, you can do some deals for us. And, Puma and Adidas were very much used to having people knocking around the Olympic Village in 1968, knocking around where all the teams were. and just trying to cut these little deals, and they would do it in the middle of the tournament. Oh, this player's looking good. Let's throw him a few grand and let's get him to wear our boots at this key match. And so Pele was seeing all these other deals getting done, and Pele said to this guy Hans Henningsen, "Look, where's my deal? Everyone's getting a deal." So they decided. So Hans was like, he went rogue and said, "Let's just cut a deal ourselves with Pele, right? Because this is too good to be true. He wants to do it." So they made a deal with Pele against the pact, which was $25,000 to wear the boots from the quarterfinals onwards, and then $100K over the next 4 years, right? Which is a significant amount back then. Players would get $1 or $2 grand for just playing in tournaments, and that was a huge amount of money. So they made this deal. He took it back to Armin Dassler, who was the son of Rudi Dassler, one half of the Dassler brothers, who were feuding brothers, in Adidas and Puma. And they said, this is a deal that's too good to be true, so let's do that. So they cut the deal with Pele. And as well as courting footballers and athletes at the time, they also used to court the media. They also used to court photographers, get photographers and video and cameramen to zoom in on the boots as well. It was so important for them to get their logo shown on TV, to get their logos on the podium. If you look at 1968, the most famous moment in the 1968 Olympics is the Black Power salute, right? Tommy Smith and John Carlos. If you look closely, you'll see that Tommy Smith has got his Puma spike on his podium with him. He didn't forget his sponsors, even when he was making this hugely significant protesting gesture.
John Carlos was sponsored by Puma as well. There's a great Swedish, sorry to divert for just a moment, but I'll tell you what, there is an absolutely fantastic Swedish kind of like poppy, folky song that was sung like, let's say it would be the Swedish equivalent of John Denver or something like that. And it's a sad tune about how Puma, basically after the 1968 Olympics, either the tune says like Puma abandoned, but I'm not 100% sure, so I wouldn't like to say that, or else it says that they supported John Carlos when everything else was abandoned. But I can't remember the tune off the top of my head, but it's a fascinating tune about the relationship between John Carlos and Puma post 1968 Mexico Olympics.
So they came up with this, so for Pele and this quarterfinal moment, they came up with this ruse, which was they got the photographers and videographers on board. They asked Pele to ask the referee for a couple of minutes to tie his laces. He very carefully bends over and ties both his laces at kickoff. And of course, the 1970 World Cup was the first World Cup to be televised in color. Everyone was watching it live. I mean, we're talking huge awareness and brand awareness, which is a marketing term that is used often. And the camera zoomed in on Pele tying his laces. And of course, you could make the very distinctive white Puma stripe on the side of those boots. And it became known. And at that point, Adidas learned of this subterfuge. And they realized that they'd been stitched up and that the Pele pact had been broken. And of course, all hell broke loose again between the two camps, who had been in a bit of a cold war, if you like. And this would then not only set off, more dirty tricks between them for years to come as they competed for the best athletes. But it's also fascinating because if you look at all these great sporting icons in history, there's always this other battle going on around them, the battle for their endorsement. So in many ways, the history of these campaigns and endorsements mirror the history of modern sport, which is why I find it so interesting. And the two are intertwined. And if you think about what was to come after that, in terms of boot deals, big endorsements, big deals that would follow, and of course the big daddy of them all, which is Nike's very famous deal with a young basketball player called Michael Jordan, who they took a gamble on. It's completely revolutionized sports marketing and the business and sector that I work in. And you can trace it all back to probably this moment being hugely significant.
Yeah, Tim, how surprising is it to you that Pele stood up and said, well, hang on a second, all these other great athletes have got their sponsorship, but I haven't got mine. Where's mine?
None, not at all. And he was, I fear that up until the last years of his life, he worried about not being financially secure. It's just how he was. And it's the scars that he carried from his youth. And he was always aware of his value. One of the fascinating things here is, and as you're saying, Amar, this is new, you know. And when England lost to West Germany for the first time, it was a friendly in '68. One of the reasons apparently was that the England players were all wearing new boots, because one of these, I can't remember which one of the two, had just paid them to wear these boots. And obviously, Alf Ramsey was the coach, hated this. You know, this is something from before his time that he doesn't really understand. And this is also in what's going on with Pele. I think it's very interesting in the Brazil coaching situation. This will take a little while, but you'll like it. Not a lot, but I think you'll like it enough to justify the time it's going to take. Because Brazil's coaching situation was strange. 66 World Cup, where they'd been bad. One of the reasons was they're almost victims of their own success and the growth of the game in the country, as well as Rio and Sao Paulo. You get the other two main centres, Porto Alegre and Belo Horizonte, also supplying players. And at a time when all of the players were still based at home, every region wanted its players to be in the national team. So they started preparing for the 66 World Cup with 44 players. Just madness, you know. That's one of the reasons that it didn't work. So this is the problem that they have. So when they think about qualifying for Mexico, what are we going to do? And it was Havelange, who was the future FIFA president, who was the boss, and he was a bright cookie. And he made an amazing decision. At the height of the military dictatorship, he brought in this fellow called João Saldanha, who's hardly a coach. He's got a little bit of coaching experience. He's mainly a journo. He's very charismatic, but he's a diehard communist. No, it just seems madness, but it made absolute perfect sense for qualification. Because what did Saldanha do? In his first press conference, he said, "These are my first choice players." And he gave out his first 11. These are the substitutes. Blah, blah, blah. And he just did away with all that politicking. You know, you put in there a dictator who wasn't going to play the regional game of, some players from this region and some players from that region. So he solved that problem. But Saldanha is unlikely to be the coach of the World Cup. He's not really good enough. And he's a left wing. He's a communist. The military regime don't want him there. They think he's going to be a problem. But also, crucially, he falls out with Pele. And Pele is Havelange's mate. You know, they're mates. And he falls out with Pele on a number of issues. And there's no consensus in Brazil that Pele should play this World Cup. Some people thought he was past it, that they would be carrying him. And Saldanha starts saying that Pele's eyesight's not good enough and so on. He gets sacked. That's why Zagallo comes in with just 3 months to go before the tournament. And as soon as he gets sacked, he goes back to journalism. And he sits down and he writes an article about the situation. And it's very measured. He was a bit of a lunatic, Saldanha. He's an interesting character. He would get drunk and wave his gun around places, you know. But very, very measured article where he took all of the politics out of it. He said he actually praised Brazil's president for liking football. So that's a good thing. But he said the center of this thing is Pele. And Pele is being sacrificed because everyone wants a piece of him all the time. He always has to play. And the sportswear manufacturers always want a piece as well. So I think João Saldanha knew what was going on, didn't like it, and that's why he fell out with Pele, which I think is probably the main reason that he lost his job. So you get that kind of clash of generations, you know, between those who think it's a little bit vulgar to earn money for you know, putting boots on, and those who think, well, why not? Why don't we maximize our earning potential? So you get that as well.
In this match, though, on the 14th of June 1970, it doesn't look like anybody else on the pitch really knows what's going on. At least they don't know. It seems to me, Amar, they don't know what the impact of this moment is. For one thing, you know, the ref isn't looking at his watch thinking, flipping hell, Pele, get on with it. Okay, I've agreed to something that nobody in the future is ever going to be able to agree to. No referee. But get on with it. Don't milk it. And the other players don't seem that bothered, neither the opposition or the Brazilian players. In fact, when kickoff finally happens, The ball goes back to one of the Brazilian midfielders, I think number 8 or something like that. He looks like he's still tying his trunks. You know, he actually passes the ball. His first kick of the ball is with his hands in his midriff. You know, like some people when you play five-a-side.
Are you accusing Gerson of playing pocket billiards?
Yeah, well, I was coming to that. When you go and play five-a-side, the first thing you got to sort out is your briefs, you know, make bits don't juggle in the wrong places. But it looks like he's doing that, but then he's passing the ball as if this is just a walk in the park. The point I'm making, Amar, is I don't think, whereas today we would look at that and think, oh gosh, what an obvious piece of marketing. But now, then, I mean, great that you saw the stripe, and it did work, because even now, 50 years and more on, my image of Pele has always been in Puma boots. You know, I don't know what he wore before that. And I didn't really necessarily register from this point, from this match in 1970. But in my mind, I don't think it was like the first thing you thought about. The England team were wearing Admiral in 66. I think they were still wearing Admiral in 1970. That was the only kind of sports manufacturer that resonated.
Admiral came in later. Admiral's a 70s.
Okay.
Yeah. So England did a deal with Umbro and Adidas in 1966. And to give you an idea of what a different time it was, you know, Alf Ramsey asked them if he could purchase the kits at a discount. You know, there was no endorsement deals at the time. And John Humphreys, who was one of the sons of the Umbro empire, they were a family from Cheshire. And Umbro is actually abbreviation of Humphrey Brothers, Umbro. He was smart enough to make a deal where he said, we'll just give you the kits for free. And that was like manna from heaven for Alf Ramsey and the rest of the FA. Oh, we're getting our kits for free. This is brilliant. They told Bobby Moore. Umbro was the clothes manufacturer, but they had a distribution deal with Adidas. They were very close, those two companies at the time. Adidas did the boots. So the England players were all given Adidas boots in 66, a standard issue. However, some of them were getting side deals. So if you look at the final, for example, you see Gordon Banks is wearing Pumas. He did a deal with Puma on the side. So some of the players were doing side deals. Bobby Moore just wanted everyone to just wear Adidas because it was just easy, standard issue. But 4 years later, everything's changed. You know, all the players are now looking to do individual deals. So for me, it's such an interesting time, even just zooming out of that tying the laces moment. It feels like we're moving from a more innocent age of football, you know, to the age of hyper commercialization, which culminates in 1978, where FIFA really start to carve out the partnerships and they bring in their partner program, and working very closely with Horst Dassler from Adidas to do that. And that partnership program exists to this day. Coca-Cola become partners of FIFA in 1978. You've got other big brands like FIFA, Adidas are there. And that brought so much money into the game for FIFA, and also led to FIFA's downfall, you know, in terms of all the corruption scandals they had.
The wonderful footage of Maradona warming up, you know, playing for Napoli, when he's doing these amazing tricks with the ball with his shoelaces undone.
Yes,
I heard. I think it was Junior, or Brazilian player, you know, knew it, and he said this when Maradona. I think it was Junior. He said, "Yeah, I had a word with Maradona about, you know, you're doing it with your shoelaces undone," and Maradona said, "Yeah, brings in more spotlight on the boots. I get more." You know, so it's absolutely explicit that's what's happening. The first, I remember watching all the World Cup films, you know, the official World Cup films, and the one that really stood out for me was 62 in Chile, because in the film you see one of the heroes of the Germans, Fritz Walter, who'd been a star player in '54. He's there working for one of these companies. You know, it's like he's there showing off his boots. Showing off the boots, I think, to the German camp. This amazing Cain and Abel story, you know, between the two feuding brothers. Why did that rivalry go so deep, and what do these brothers do to each other?
Yeah, it goes really far back. So the two brothers, Adi Dassler essentially was an innovator, a craftsman. He was a bit of a cobbler. You know, he was obsessed with creating shoes. and his older brother was Rudolf, known as Rudi Dassler, and they both lived in this. They both owned the shoemaking factory in this small town called Herzogenaurach in Bavaria, just outside Nuremberg. And no one had ever heard of this town, but now it's known as being the town of Adidas and Puma. So their company was called Gebrüder Dassler, the brothers Dassler. But the advent of the war absolutely drove them apart, because like many companies in Germany, and any companies in the country where, the war begins, they were swept up into the war machine. So they were swept up into Hitler's war machine. So Rudolf was actually conscripted into the Nazis. And he believes that he was betrayed by his brother, and that's how he ended up being conscripted. And that actually, started the feud. And then Adi, who ran the factory, was producing various items for the Nazis. So boots, he even was producing rockets as well, it's been claimed. And it's hotly debated, as with lots of people coming out of that war, the line between, who was under duress to be involved in the war effort, because everyone had to do it, and who was actually a Nazi sympathizer or actually believed in the Nazi ideology. And when they, of course, came out of the war, it was a case of, well, actually, who's the bigger Nazi? That's what they were playing with each other as brothers. They were pointing the finger at each other. And that's where the feud began. Their wives didn't get along either. And at some point, they all lived in the same villa, the family villa, above a hill overlooking this town. But coming out of the war, the acrimony between the two brothers was such that, Rudy decided to leave and set up his own factory. And he was going to call it Ruda, which was a nickname given to him. But that didn't work. So he ended up going with Puma, which was a derivation of that, or not far from that. And Adi, which was his nickname. His actual full name was Adolf. He was known as Adi for short. Came up with Adidas as an abbreviation of his name. So the two of them set up their own companies in the aftermath of the Second World War. And it was incredible in that you then had this sort of race between them to sign up the biggest athletes in the world. And they did that over the next, 20, 30, 40 years. And it's something that was still going on, until both families lost controls of the respective companies, not that long ago.
Yeah, it's fascinating to learn that Adidas could have been Adolphus. So they clearly got their marketing right in that respect. Now we've got to such a point in sports.
You must be wearing Adolf shoes. Yeah, it wouldn't have worked, would it?
Who do you think you are kidding, Mr. Adolf? No,
I can't imagine Run DMC holding up the Adidas and saying "My Adolf Das." It just wouldn't work, would it?
You're absolutely right. That would not work. But it does seem as if the marketing of football boots in particular, if we can stick to that for a moment, because it's a fascinating one. My generation, we just got the cheapest boots that we could get at Woolworths, because you had the £2 ones at Woolworths, and we just, dreamed. I literally used to stand outside the sportswear shop on Green Lanes in North London. It was called Duval's, and it was one of those shops that had like two shop windows and sort of the entrance in the middle, if you see what I mean. They'd obviously was so successful that they had rented two shops side by side, so you could sort of enter and look, even in the evenings, before they used to pull down shutters. Remember, a lot of these stores were open in the evening and sometimes left their lights on, so you could sort of dream about what you can't afford to have. And you say it was Duval's at that time, but I never ever expected to get the Alan Ball boots where you could swivel on the ball of your foot, rather, to show you how Alan Ball did his half turn and beat defenders. I just looked at those boots, and there were George Best ones and everything like that. But if you'd seen them on the pitch, you wouldn't have known who was wearing what. The TV wasn't that clear. Nowadays, there's so much focus on football, the latest cameras and every angle of football. So if you're playing a football match, you'd have to be literally blind to not see the marketing on the boots itself. But they've gone a bit further. So sometimes a brand will come out with a gold boot or a pink boot or an orange boot, and literally everybody on the pitch on both sides who are being sponsored by them will be wearing that regulation color in that match. Otherwise, they're not going to get paid. How far can this stuff go? Because it distracts, doesn't it, from the football, particularly when you're a young kid. And there does seem to be a battle now beyond just the football manufacturers, but the marketeers, the money men who have been so reliant on the wall-to-wall coverage of football by television to get their marketing across. It does seem as if there is a battle between them and football, the soul of football, for who is the predominant exports, as it were, which is the predominant thing to consider when you watch a football match. Are they stronger than the football teams and the players?
I think today the game has changed really, because what happened was back then it was all about getting your 3 stripes or your 1 stripe, or what was to come, the swoosh, onto the visibility onto the right athletes and just get noticed. And what's happened is, these brands have now transcended that. You watch a football match, people could be wearing Adidas, Puma, Nike. You might not even notice that. But what they will do is sign incredibly lucrative deals with athletes. And I think what's happened is we've moved on from promoting the functional benefits of shoes, right? And it's like the history of marketing. It always used to be about the functional benefits. So it would be like, hey, buy my shoes. It's going to make you run faster. It's going to make you jump higher. And that's what it was all about back then. Or go to McDonald's, it's like having a meal, but it's really easy. Or, all these other products, it's all about the functional benefits. But actually now marketing has really moved on. And the reason why boot deals are so fascinating is because they have really supercharged that change. And actually, these companies have redefined sports marketing. It's moved away from simply promoting those benefits to actually tapping into the personas of these athletes and what they stand for. So Pele, and again, go back to that significant moment, was not just a footballer, was he? To call him just a footballer would be not to do him justice. He was a cultural icon. And the deals that were to follow, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at the Lakers, cultural icon. Johan Cruyff was, the star of the 70s. He was a Puma ambassador. Franz Beckenbauer, he represented more, and he was Adidas's star man for many years. And of course, Michael Jordan, we know that Michael Jordan is significant from a sports marketing perspective, not just because of what he did on the basketball court, but also what he meant in sort of wider American culture and hip hop culture and all of those worlds kind of merging together. And that is what a boot deal does now. It gives you the opportunity to tap into what these people stand for in terms of, what their values are. So whether it's self-drive or determination, or whether it's, the cultural backgrounds that they come from, that is the space that's really interesting for these brands. And so they're becoming more like storytellers now, brands. And if you look at, for example, one of the best marketing campaigns of the last 5 years was called Dream Crazy by Nike. And it was around Colin Kaepernick when he famously took the knee and divided the whole of the United States. And Nike came out and they stood by Colin Kaepernick and said, believe in something, even if it means losing everything. And that for me was another watershed moment, because Nike had earned the right to talk about this. It worked. It was
that one worked.
Impactful. I mean, yeah.
I was going to say the one that didn't work was Nike Jeezy. You see, the problem with making your brand or wrapping your brand around a sports person is that sports people are human beings. They've got legs, they can walk away. They've also got mouths. And as you know from marketing, it takes a lot of remarketing to readjust something that's broken because somebody said the wrong word or whatever. The prime ministers will tell you that.
That's Adidas, Yeezy. Just to clarify that's Adidas, not Nike.
Oh, is that not Nike? Oh, for some
reason,
Yeezy,
the Yeezy range with Kanye West was Adidas. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for getting me out of the jail of Nike court legal contention there. I appreciate that. So, well, they got that spectacularly wrong, I think it's fair to say.
Well, that's the risk you take. And I think absolutely, you understand why sports brands are attracted to, you know, hip hop artists, cultural icons. And as I said, those worlds are merging now between who is a sports star, who is a music star, all of those things that have blurred. And people follow icons, they follow stars. And it's not just, you know, people don't just say, hey, I'm a sports fan and I'm not interested in other things. Our passion points are all merging. So the appeal of someone like Kanye West, you know, pre-cancellation, pre-having the problems that he's had and saying some of the things that he shouldn't have said, you understand why that works and why that was actually a landmark deal at the time for Adidas, because that was giving him equity and that was giving him the opportunity to actually not just do an endorsement deal, but to actually have some kind of ownership over this range as well. And so that was a hugely significant move. But obviously, as it transpired, they were not able to row back from some of the things that he said, which, you know, he never should have said.
Tim, I don't know where you stand on this one, whether the commercial boys of the mad men, as they were.
Indeed, that's what I'm thinking of, because the daddy of them all, I suppose, is a certain American soft drinks. Isn't it? You know, that's where Mad Men ends. I had a mate who worked marketing for one of these, the biggest of these American soft drink manufacturers, and he told me once he came to Brazil for a meeting with the creative team. And he said, all right, well, what are your ideas now? And they said, yeah, we want to do this campaign all about the taste. And he just looked at them and said, I should sack you all now. No, it's nothing to do with the taste.
It's the point fucking taste.
It's the point that Amar is making about the moving away from the functionality to the associations, and that's always been, you know, that has been the selling point of that. You know,
but wouldn't it be great though?
Coca-Cola used football. Coca-Cola used football and have done since 1978, since they started that partnership, to talk about their values and talk about, you know, how they want to support young people. And it's all about other things. It's never really about what goes on the pitch, right? They're using football as a conduit to talk about, to make people feel good about them as a company, essentially.
Yeah, I was going to say, wouldn't it be great to hear one of these bottled water companies, you know, say, look, it's all about the taste. And I'd say, yeah, it is actually. It's a really unique taste. There's nothing else that can be. But when it comes,
the challenge for these companies. Go on, sorry, Dotun, go.
No, I was just going to say, there are some sports in which we've seen the athletes clearly, and maybe some levels of football, where we've seen the athletes clearly are beholden to their commercial partners, much more so financially at least, than to, you know, their first sporting port of call. We've seen athletes in the Olympic Games, and particularly when the Olympic Games were supposed to be just pure amateur, sort of try and make a living by giving a nod to their sponsors, or taking off their shoes and putting it around their neck in front of the cameras, all the tricks they do, tennis players wearing the baseball caps. I mean, if you're not one of the top tennis players, you might actually get 100 grand for wearing your baseball cap. You're not going to get that from your match receipts, are you? And I just wonder whether there is an argument to say that enough is enough. I love this moment, not just because Pele is tying his shoes in this match we've been talking about on the 14th of June, 1970, Brazil versus Peru in the Mexico World Cup. I love it, not just because of, you know, now that we look at it in reflection and look at it as a historic moment for sports marketing, but I love it because it's a great game. And even Pele tying his shoelaces has not overshadowed what is an immensely entertaining game on the one hand, a very ticky-tacky football game from a sort of a Peruvian point of view. And when you look at where Peruvian football is today compared to then, you think, oh, these are the glory days. You're witness. There's some other historic context. But if it was a shit game, I'd think that frigging Pele deal, you know, tying his shoelaces makes it even worse.
Well, the question there is the extent to which the marketing overshadows the purity of the game.
Yeah, I could have said it like that, but it was like when you said, look, this is going to take a long time. Yeah, you probably won't like it that much, but you will like it a little bit. And I thought, I like this, you know.
But that leads to a question for Amar about the current moment. Do you think that the movement of some players to Saudi Arabia will have a negative effect on their brand value?
That's such a good question. And I think it's not, for me, it's not a black and white issue. And I think sometimes in the West, we can be guilty of simplifying what is right and what is wrong in the world. And, where sport should be played and where sport shouldn't be played. And I think the reality is that for people who live in the Middle East, or even people who live in Asia or other countries or Africa, they might view things differently. So it's very easy for us in Britain, for example, to take a sort of high ground and take exception. Let's take Formula One, for example, and take exception to Grand Prix being played in the Middle East, where there are some issues around human rights and some big challenges. But when the Formula One Grand Prix goes to a state in the US where, abortion has been, recently made illegal, those same questions are not asked. So, I'm not by any means excusing some of the things that have happened in Saudi Arabia in the last 5 to 10 years. But I do think that this debate sometimes requires the perspective of all sides and a little bit of acknowledgement that it's quite ambiguous, really.
You see, I didn't take Tim's question like that. It's interesting that I saw it, and I think you've taken it the right way, Amar, but I was thinking that Tim was like referencing when Cristiano Ronaldo goes to Saudi Arabia and he's out of our vision, does his brand take a knock? And what I was going to say was I immediately thought of Kylian Mbappe, who, as we speak, this won't work for people listening to this several months from now, but as we speak, doesn't have a transfer on the table. They're still talking about before the transfer window closes, he might go somewhere. Well, I'm not sure about that. But does his brand, if he went to Saudi Arabia, would his brand be somewhat take something of a knock? I don't think so.
Well, he's made it very clear that he doesn't want to go. He's
not
going.
Yeah, no, as he should, but as he should in terms of footballing, possibilities, because he is the best footballer in the world. I mean, if you accept that Lionel Messi is somewhat past it now, and this youngster is coming up, it's a scary thing. He is the Pele, certainly of his generation, if not the Maradona or otherwise, and you look and think sometimes a footballer can get above the marketing, that they are the best footballer in the world. So going back to that reference point when the bloke from Coca-Cola goes to Brazil, Tim, actually, you would say, wouldn't you, trying to market Kylian Mbappe, forget the rest of the hype, he's the best. Forget the other shit. He is the best,
But see, I would imagine for Saudi Arabia, Benzema, it's a fit, isn't it? Because that's a lifestyle choice that he's making. Neymar turned up the other day in a crucifix. What's going on there? Wow. What's that all about? Very, very interesting times.
Yeah, I think just on that, guys, I would say there are a group of footballers from a marketing perspective who transcend where they're playing, right? Messi's gone to the MLS and, it's going fabulously well for him on the pitch and off the pitch as well in terms of brand endorsements. Similarly, Ronaldo, his social following hasn't taken a hit. He's bigger than the Saudi Pro League right now, arguably, in terms of his reach, his cultural relevance. And Mbappe, I'm really glad you mentioned Mbappe, because from a sports marketing perspective, he's so interesting because he's actually a bit of a disruptor. He's caused an issue sometimes with the French Federation in terms of saying, I don't want my name to be on that product. So if you remember, Ronaldo did it with Coca-Cola, I think at the Euros a couple of years ago, where he moved the Coca-Cola away and he said, drink water in Portuguese, beba con agua, and moved it away. And it caused a huge uproar. But the reality is companies like Coca-Cola are going to have to be savvy to that now, because footballers might not necessarily want to be seen to be endorsing a fizzy drink. And they're very image conscious, particularly someone like Ronaldo. Secondly, Mbappe, as I said, he has gone to the French Federation and he has led a lobby of players in the France team to say, we don't want to endorse this product and we don't want to endorse that product. I think he had an issue with the KFC partnership that the France Football Federation signed, and he led the opposition to it. So what we're seeing is player power, players taking more control over what they endorse and their marketing, because there are many ways to get a player's face on your product, right? You can do a partnership with the player, which the player's agents always prefer. You can do a partnership with the team, their club team. You can do a partnership with their national team. But ultimately, players are now starting to speak up and say, right, we don't want our name on that product. This doesn't fit my brand and what I stand for.
Look, all I'm going to say is rice, baby, because we're running out of time for this podcast. I do want to look at the accompanying official music charts of the day. You weren't even born, Amar. You weren't even born. Mate, I was out in Levi's Stay Press and Tuto Mohair at this point. You weren't even born. So what do you think of the charts of 1970?
You know what? I wasn't, but I do like a bit of, I'm a big hip hop fan, first of all. So that means I also like funk music. And I think that time is a great time for funk and soul music. I love Motown. I'm a big Motown fan. I looked at the chart and the first song that jumped out at me was Marvin Gaye, actually. Abraham, Martin, Paul and John, is it?
Abraham, Martin,
yeah. John F. Kennedy, that one.
Yeah.
Martin, as in Luther King, and Abraham Lincoln. But it's a very haunting song, that one. I remember the first funeral I went to of a friend of mine, a fellow journalist, and I came back. I was driving home from the funeral, and my friend, the journalist, his name was Martin, who had died. And I just couldn't stop singing that song. Alone in my car, I suddenly found myself singing, "Has anybody seen my good friend Martin?" It's a haunting song. It's one of his best, I would say.
I love that song and I love that time. And I think that song feels to me Marvin Gaye going from being the Motown pop singer to being the Marvin Gaye of what's going on and being the more artistic guy that we saw in the 70s and then deeper thinker. And, he's one of my favorite singers of all time. So that's why that one leapt out at me.
Although funk is around at this point, it's not making it into the charts. I think funk is your underground music. It's your indie music at this point. One or two people broke through with it, thinking, perhaps it's fair to say Sly and the Family Stone were around at that point. Some of the Stax stuff was very funky, but it's still very much slightly indie. Stax was an indie label compared to Motown, but you do have Motown here. Talking of marketing, Pepsi dodged a bullet with regards to Michael Jackson, didn't they? ABC, so easy as 1, 2, 3. It's at number 14 with the Jackson 5.
It shows that the demographic of record buying public is getting younger, isn't it? Because Motown have looked at that market.
You're right. And that's why they signed the Jackson 5, by the way.
Yes,
they signed this wholesome black family from Detroit, etc. They had a cartoon going at this point. They've got cartoons. So two cartoons. The Jackson 5 cartoon, I think it's the first one. Then the Osmonds comes a couple of years later when they're riding high, maybe a year or so later. But ABC was the perfect soundtrack to that cartoon. I think they played it at the beginning, all the single time. And if you're a young black kid growing up in London at that time, I could tell you what, you wanted to be a young black kid growing up in America. We didn't know about the ghettos. We didn't know life is a ghetto. And we didn't know what Marvin Gaye meant when he was like asking what's going on. But we did know ABC. So it seemed like America was paradise for young black kids. I'm not making a huge racial point about this, but you can imagine Tottenham wasn't paradise. It wasn't paradise in comparison.
Your cultural reference points, they're Black America, aren't they?
At this point, yeah, I would have thought so.
But not Africa.
No, Jamaica or the Caribbean. Mine is not Africa, and that's probably more about where I was living at the time. If I'd been living in Chelsea amongst middle-class Nigerians, it probably still would be Africa at this point. But, your parents are working 9 to 5. Their control over your cultural destination is loosening because we were eating Nigerian food every day, but that was about it. We're losing the language at this point. Been here in England at this point 5 years. We're losing the language, mate.
Just the thing that you're wandering around the playground as a little kid singing "We Won the Cup." You're already
and it's also "We Won the War." In 1964, we actually thought, oh, well, the war was a couple of years ago. So we won the war in 1964. But my reference is, funnily enough, coming up to be Status Quo at number 18, Down the Dustpipe, very different kind of song. They haven't found that, I would say, in any case,
12-bar blues,
Bo Diddley riff is what I was going to say.
Well, they were a psychedelic band, weren't they, a couple of years earlier?
It feels like that they're a country and western band here,
right?
Like,
they're listening to Creedence, who are big at the time.
Creedence are in the charts as well, mate. At this time, you wouldn't have thought, because you think of them as an album band. Sorry about this, Amar. I'm sorry. You know what old timers like when you're talking about their generation, particularly with the youngsters around who heard about the '60s and the '70s and everything like that. Well, we can fill you in with a lot of bullshit about what it was like in those days, and you would never know the difference. But at number 33, I think it's clear that Creedence Clearwater Revival is there, up around the bend. But and Rufus Thomas is also there.
Yeah, good old Rufus.
Let's not forget Daddy Rufus Thomas, who do the funky chicken. Oh. And
Temptations, Psychedelic Shack. So you're seeing Motown here move away from the Holland Dozier Holland, Smokey Robinson hit machine. Marvin is fighting to express himself. He had to fight like mad with Berry Gordy to release what's going on. Berry Gordy didn't want it released. And when it was a success, said, "Oh maybe I don't know the market anymore." The Temptations with Norman Whitfield, they're doing these, ghetto operas, and Psychedelic Shack is part of that. So it's Motown beginning to branch away. I suppose that there's lots of cross fertilization at this time between what white bands are doing and what some of the black music is doing. Which is really interesting, and
I think that's always been there, but it was manufactured to not be there, to keep people separate. That's why they had their race records and everything.
But it's really two-way at this point. The themes that Whitfield is taking on, when the English bands have done a lot to widen the palette of what you can talk about in songs. And Whitfield's latched onto that, and he's right. I'm going to use some of those techniques to tell stories about our people, which was hard for the Temptations. Because the Temptations had to sing songs when they're saying
there's too many words.
Well, but also they have to sing songs when they're saying, "My father didn't know the meaning of work." That was tough. No. Singing that.
Of course. If you got to go home to your dad, it's not going to be, or even to your late dad.
Disrespected mama and treated her like dirt.
Well,
not an easy song to sing.
Well, with Biggie Small, his mum always used to complain about one line. I mean, Biggie Small is a guy go, "Who the fuck is this calling me at 5:36 in the morning, crack of dawning?" And his mum complains about just one couplet. When he says, every year Christmas missed us. His mom's like, no, that's not true. Christmas
the sacrifices I made.
Exactly. They're never going to like that. But it's a really interesting chart. I mean, unfortunately, at number 50, we didn't know what Rolf Harris meant when he was singing Two Little Boys.
We didn't.
So let's leave that to one side. I'm just saying it's there. But apart from that, you got Lee Marvin at number 47. This is a bloke with a gravelly voice that was a great actor in cowboy movies. All of a sudden he's singing, "Oh, sports."
That was very good. That's very good.
And there's a video to go with it because, of course, it's a soundtrack for a movie that people have forgotten about the movie.
Is it Paint Your Wagon?
It is Paint Your Wagon. And at number 46, this is the most amazing revelation from this chart, because Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi.
They paved paradise.
But it sounds like it is a very modern song. I can't believe it's certainly not 1970, maybe 1980, 1990, but 1970. She was way ahead of her time.
Way ahead of the curve.
And Marvin Gaye, as we know, in terms of the environment.
That's a song I know and really like, Big Yellow Taxi. Great message. Still feels relevant today. There was one other song that jumped out at me because I remember it when I was a kid. This is a different version, The Spirit in the Sky, because I remember Doctor and the Medics.
Doctor and the Medics.
Doctor and the Medics got to
Yeah.
number one with it. Yeah, it got to number one twice. Doctor and the Medics version is basically a complete rip-off, but somehow the original, which is in the charts at the moment, the original number 22 by Norman Greenbaum sounds better. I think it's because it is an organic tune, you know, and Doctor and the Medics feels like it's a building block tune for me. They did it well. I saw them live at my university. They came and honored the booking at my university when they could have said, look, we're not doing it for that anymore because, you know, we're number one now. They came there at the time, and so that would have been about 1983, 84 or whatever it was.
Did you ever introduce Doctor and the Medics to Dr. Dre?
No, that's a different era of my, and also
kind of medical convention.
Well, yes. Yeah, let's leave it at that.
He didn't Dr. Kildare to do that.
That's a good one. Quick shout out for Johnny Cash. What is true for number 23? Moving on from the Boy Named Sue kind of talking Johnny Cash. And Elvis has got a great performance in that Kentucky Rain. I mean, I love Elvis from his rock and roll days, his Heartbreak Hotel and Jailhouse Rock days and everything else. But by now he's found his mojo, and he realizes that he's got a voice verging on a baritone almost for a great epic song, and Kentucky Rain is one of those. Not my favorite song by him, but I think he does such an amazing rendition of this that he's got the chops. Hey, as much as I would love to talk to you all about Engelbert Humperdinck, who's in the charts 10 years after, who were in the charts, and Dana, who's in the charts, and let's not forget Simon and Garfunkel with Bridge Over Troubled Water, that stayed in the album charts forever and ever at this point. I think about 3 years or so in the album charts, if not number one in the album charts for much of that time. As much as I'd love to talk to you about these things, we've run out of time, guys. Amar, what an absolute pleasure to take this Brazilian Shirt Name podcast in another direction.
Pleasure was all mine, guys. I really, really enjoyed our chat. Thank you.